Simon Sez subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
We've made the files the instructor uses in this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
Microsoft SharePoint is a powerful platform that helps teams collaborate and manage information effectively. It serves as a centralized hub for storing, organizing, and sharing documents, data, and resources within an organization. And SharePoint enables seamless teamwork by offering features like document libraries, lists, workflows, and customizable sites, making it easy to create intranets, extranets, and collaborative websites. It enhances productivity, version control, and security while fostering collaboration among team members, making it an essential tool for modern businesses to streamline their work processes and information management. Hi, I'm Deborah Ashby. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I've been using Microsoft SharePoint for over 10 years. In this course, we're going to explore how to really get up and running when working with SharePoint. This course is aimed at people who are beginners who maybe have never used SharePoint before, or maybe you've had a little play around with it and you'd like to understand some of the intricacies of the application in a bit more detail. And we have 8 sections crammed full of SharePoint tips and tricks to really get you on your way. We're going to start out in section 1 with a brief course introduction. We'll then really get started with SharePoint Online. So we'll make sure that we're comfortable with the interface and all of the moving parts of the application. In section 3, we'll spend some time talking about SharePoint lists, and in section 4, we're going to explore SharePoint document libraries. Section 5 is all about how SharePoint integrates with other Microsoft 365 applications. And in section 6, we're going to take a look at how we can streamline our processes by incorporating workflows. In section 7, we're going to talk about SharePoint sites, and in section 8, we're simply going to close out the course. Now, this course contains 39 video-led demonstrations. And when it comes to course files, because this is an application that's entirely online, there aren't any downloadable course files per se, because you're going to be working completely within your SharePoint Online account. So all you really need for this course is to make sure that you do have a Microsoft 365 account that has access to SharePoint Online. Now, at the end of each section, there is an exercise. And the exercise is conducted in the form of a video. I'll give you some instruction based on what you've just learnt, and then you'll have an opportunity to view my solution. And of course, we also have end of section quizzes so you can really test your knowledge. So without further ado, it's time to fire up the Microsoft 365 browser and get started learning SharePoint Online. It's important to understand how SharePoint permissions work before we get started. When a company is thinking about implementing SharePoint Online, it more often than not stems from a need to create a centralized company or team intranet site to house important information, store documents, and communicate effectively. SharePoint's collaboration capabilities are hugely attractive to managers looking for a complete solution when it comes to managing content. However, for you and I as end users, the very best thing about using SharePoint Online is its deep integration with other Microsoft 365 applications that we use daily. Every version of SharePoint works well with Office. So we're talking about applications like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and OneNote. Amongst other things, we can store our Office files in a SharePoint document library and work with them online or offline. Now, it might be that when we're working with maybe mission-critical documents within SharePoint Online, we need to ensure that those documents are secure and only the people who need to view and edit them can. So in every SharePoint site, there are 3 permission levels. The first one is site visitors. Now, site visitors can see the site, they can see the data, but they can't add or edit anything. The next level up is site members. Site members can contribute, edit, and delete documents. They can also do light customization to the design of the site. And then finally, right at the top of the tree, we have site owners. It's worth noting that if you create a SharePoint site from scratch, then you will automatically be the site owner. However, we do recommend that you have at least 2 site owners per site. And site owners can pretty much do everything. They're the only ones that can delete the site if they need to. And they'll be the ones making all the high-level decisions as to what gets added to the site and the direction the site takes. Now, whilst these are the default 3 permission levels, these can also be customized. And we will take a little bit of a look at that a bit later on in the course. Now, outside of these 3 permission groups, nothing can be seen or changed on a SharePoint site by anybody else. So somebody who's not a member of the site can't work on the site at all. Now, due to differing permission levels amongst end users, it might be that I search for a document in SharePoint, but because I don't have permission to access it, I can't find it. However, my colleague Sarah down the hall might run exactly the same search and be able to see that document. It all depends on those permission levels. And site permissions can also vary from site to site. So you might be a site owner for one site where you can pretty much see and do anything, but you might be a visitor on another site where your capabilities are more limited. So let's talk about browsers. To use SharePoint Online effectively, you'll need to use one of the recommended browsers. And those are Internet Explorer 10 or 11, Microsoft Edge, the latest version of Google Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. And just for the record, throughout the balance of this course, I'm going to be using Microsoft Edge. The final thing to note in this lesson is that SharePoint Online is a cloud-based product. And one advantage of this is that you're always working in the most recent version as updates are pushed out as they occur. Gone are the days where we need to install updates manually or upgrade our software frequently. But due to the frequency of updates and the sheer amount of changes that Microsoft make to their products, there is a good chance that some things I show you in this course will look slightly different when you come to work through the course. So I'm recording this course at a particular moment in time, August 2023. So if you come to this course in a month, 3 months, or maybe even a year, you might find that new functionality has been added, buttons have been moved, and pages look different. So my recommendation to you is that you go into this course, and any cloud-based course for that matter that changes frequently, with an open mind and a willingness to be a bit curious and resilient if things have changed. It's time now to do exercise 1. And in this exercise, we're just going to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course. And this section was simply the introduction. So this isn't really an exercise. I just want you to check a few things before you begin. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just to make sure that you have a working Microsoft 365 account that has access to SharePoint Online. We're definitely going to need that if we want to complete this course. And I'd like you to be able to explain the difference between the 3 permission level groups in SharePoint. And then finally, I'd like you to ensure you are using an approved browser to access SharePoint Online. Now, as I said, there isn't really an answer to this particular exercise. If you get stuck on the final 2 points here, then I would encourage you to go back and review Lesson 102. You're going to find all of the answers in there. That's it for now, and I will see you in the next section.
For the next section, you'll want to download the course exercise files. Click the link below in the video description to get these. You can also scroll through the details to find timestamps for each section in this course. If you're enjoying this training, please leave us a comment.
There are a few different ways that you can access SharePoint Online. And all of these methods, first and foremost, rely on the fact that you have a Microsoft 365 subscription that includes SharePoint Online. So before you proceed, you might want to check that you do have one of those subscriptions. Now, the most obvious way to access SharePoint Online is to simply do it from the Microsoft 365 portal. So I've just opened up an Edge web browser and I'm going to type in office.com. Let's hit enter. Now, if you've signed in before to Microsoft 365, it will take you straight into your homepage, or the portal as we call it. If you haven't signed in before, then you will be prompted to enter in your email address and your password. that's assigned to your Microsoft 365 account. And that will take you to this start page. Now, once you're at this start page, you can then click on the app launcher in the top left-hand corner. It's this little icon that looks like a waffle, and that's going to open up all of the applications that you have access to within your Microsoft 365 subscription. And one of those should be SharePoint. There it is, just there. We can click, it's going to open up in a brand new tab and take us to the SharePoint start page. Now, one thing I would recommend you do is, if you're going to be in and out of SharePoint all the time, I would bookmark this page as a favorite in my browser to make it super easy. So let's do that. I'm going to go over to where we have the little star just here. Now, this process will be different depending on what type of browser you're using, but I think most of us are used to bookmarking web pages by now. So I'm going to click on the star. I'm going to call this SharePoint. Let's call it SharePoint homepage. And then I can choose where I want to save this. I'm going to add this to my favorites bar. Let's click on done. And now whenever I open a new browser, and I can use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-O to open up my favorites. And right at the bottom here, there is SharePoint homepage. Now I could reorganize this list so it's a bit closer to the top, but for the time being, we'll just click on it and it's going to jump us directly to where we need to be. So that is a nice quick way of getting to SharePoint easily. Now, it's also worth noting that you can access SharePoint sites in a couple of other different ways. You can access them through other Microsoft 365 applications. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to click the app launcher one more time and we're going to open up Outlook. Now, one thing that you may not have used before or even noticed are Microsoft 365 groups. So you can see here right at the bottom of my email list, I have groups, and currently I have access to one group, the HR team. Now, we're going to discuss this in more detail a bit later on, but just know that when you create a Microsoft 365 group, it automatically creates a SharePoint site associated with that group. So this particular group has 5 members. If I click, I can see who those members are. So these are all members of the HR team. And what I could do is click the 3 dots, and in here we have Site. And if I click this, it will jump me across to the corresponding SharePoint site for that particular group. And because this is a brand new site, it's popping up all of the helpful information for start designing your site and also next steps. But that effectively is a site already created for us simply by creating a Microsoft 365 group. Something similar happens when you create a community in Yammer. That will also create a SharePoint site that you can access through Yammer. So just bear that in mind. As I said, we will discuss that in a bit more detail later. But for the time being, I want you to just log in to Microsoft 365, open up SharePoint, and get yourself to this start page, ready to move forward to the next lesson. Once you've logged into SharePoint Online, you'll be taken to what we refer to as the SharePoint start page. So in this lesson, we're just going to get familiar with this start page and how to navigate. So if we start all the way over on the left-hand side, you can see that we have a vertical menu of different icons. Now, this will just take you through to different parts of SharePoint. So this really is your main navigation. At the top here, we have a home icon. This is always going to take you back to this page just here, this SharePoint start page. We then have My Sites, My News, My Files, and My Lists. Then right at the bottom, we have a little create button just here. So this is going to allow us to create different pieces of content directly from within this vertical menu. So we can create things like news posts, pages, brand new sites. We can even create Word documents, spreadsheets, presentations, notebooks, and lists from here as well, all without leaving SharePoint. And of course, we will be looking at this vertical menu in a bit more detail later on. Now, next to the vertical menu, you're going to see following, recent, save for later, and featured links. Now, you might be looking at your SharePoint site thinking, well, mine looks nothing like this. And that very well may be the case. If this is the first time that you're accessing SharePoint Online, then you're not really going to see anything on this start page. I can see things like news, I can see sites and other things because I've been using SharePoint Online for a while, and my homepage, my start page, has updated accordingly. So don't worry too much if you can't see anything at the moment. All you really need to know here is that underneath this following section, this is where we can effectively follow different sites that we're interested in. Now, it's worth noting that if you create a brand new site from scratch, and we can do that using the link just above, then that site will automatically be added to your followed list. For other sites, you have to elect to follow them. For example, if we scroll down this main page and go down to where I have frequent sites, these are some sites that I've accessed recently. So let's say that I want to start following the Friday Lunch Club site. All I need to do here is click the star, and I'm now following that site. And if I scroll up again to my following section on the left-hand side, you can see there is Friday Lunch Club. So this kind of acts like a favorites area in a way, and enables us to follow and access sites that we find interesting quickly. Underneath the following area, we have recent sections, pretty much what it says on the tin. It's going to give us quick ways to access sites that we've been into recently. We then have a saved for later area. So this is where we can effectively bookmark sites to read later. And you'll notice that if we go to this site just here, Microsoft News Center, you can see we have a little bookmark icon. If I click that, it's going to put it down into this saved for later area. Click it again to remove the bookmark. So really, this whole left-hand side pane is just giving us quick ways to access sites that we find interesting. Now, in the middle here, where we have news from sites, this is kind of an aggregation. This is going to change depending on what's going on in the sites that you follow. So if you follow quite a few different sites, you're going to basically get a news feed from each of those sites on your start page. And you can dive in and out of any news item that interests you. But just be aware that this is going to change depending on what's happening in those sites. Now, a couple of other things to point out. Notice running across the top, we have search. So this is where we can go if we need to search for files, people, other types of content in SharePoint. And again, we're going to talk more about search a bit later on. And then all the way over on the right-hand side, we have a cog icon. This is going to jump us into our settings. So from settings, we can do things like add a page, add an app, we can take a look at the site contents, or we can check out our site settings. And I would highly recommend that you do come into here. A lot of your settings are default settings, which might be completely fine for you. But if you need to get a little bit more granular, this is where you're going to find all of your different site settings. Now, going through each one of these is outside the scope of this course. We're going to use the defaults, but I do encourage you to have a look through here in your own time. Now, this is probably a good point to mention. If you do find yourself on a page like this and you simply want to get back to your start page, you can always simply click on the SharePoint logo in the top left-hand corner. Let's click on this and we'll find ourselves back at start. Now, just briefly before we finish up this lesson, we're going to jump into a site. So let's take a look at our frequent sites. I think we're just going to jump into Mark a Project Team. We can click to jump to that site. Now, currently this site is pretty empty. This is basically the template you see when you first create a site. So this is kind of waiting for me to start customizing it and adding things like news items, quick links, and documents to my document library. But before we start doing all of that, let's again just make sure we're comfortable with what we can see here. So within each site in SharePoint, we're going to get another left-hand navigation menu. Currently, we're clicked on the home page. This is the home page of our website, but we have other links in here that will link us out to other Microsoft 365 applications. For example, conversations. If we click on conversations, this is going to jump us across to the Microsoft 365 group for this particular SharePoint site. If we click on documents, it's going to take us to the SharePoint document library for this site. And you can see that we already have some folders in here which contain files. We can also access a team notebook that is related to this site as well. We can see the pages that make up our site. We can see our content list as well. Now, a lot of these things that you see in this menu are standard, but some of these have been customized. And notice that we have an edit button at the bottom, and when we click this, it will basically allow us to move these around by dragging and dropping them. And we can also create our own links within this navigation. So we might want to link to other pages within this SharePoint site, or maybe external websites. And once again, we're going to cover all of this when we look at customization. Remember, we just need to click on Home to jump us back to the home page for this site. So try not to get confused between the home page for a site and the SharePoint start page, which shows us all of our sites. But in terms of navigation, that is pretty much it. I will see you in the next lesson. In this quick lesson, we're just going to take a look at how we can edit and customize our profile, because your profile is pretty important when you're working in SharePoint Online. If people want to see a bit more information about you, then your profile is where they're going to go. Now, to access your profile, if you cast your eyes all the way over to the top right-hand corner, you should notice your photo. Now, if you haven't added a photo yet, then you're just going to have your initials up here. But if we click on the photo, we can access our profile by clicking on My Microsoft 365 profile. Now, when we jump into our profile, it's going to open up another Microsoft 365 application called Delve. And we can use Delve for a few different things. This is where we can come to update our profile, but it also provides us with an interface where we can organize our documents as well as our email attachments. So basically just here, you can see my recent activity. So you can see that I've done a lot of modifications to a specific SharePoint team site. If we scroll down a bit further, I can also see people that I've been working with across Microsoft 365. And this would be accurate because I've just added all of these people into a SharePoint team site. Now, the other half of the screen is all related to your profile. So you can jazz this up a little bit and make this look a little bit nicer for when people click on your profile. Now, notice in the top right hand corner, we can change our cover photo. We have a few template ones in here dividing down into different categories. So we can go for nature, we can go for landscapes. Let's do that. Let's change it to something like that. I think that looks pretty good. And then close this down to save. We can also change our profile photo just here as well. So I'm going to do that. Let's click on the camera icon and I'm going to choose to upload a new photo. And this is the photo I'm going to use. Let's click on open. You can adjust it so you can zoom in or zoom out if you want to, and then move it around and get it in the correct position and then click on apply. Now, I will say with this, sometimes it does take a while to filter through and update, but you should find that if you refresh the page, it should have changed in the top right-hand corner, which I can see that it has. Now, if we want to make any further changes to our profile, we can click on the Update Profile button, and we can work our way through these different sections, adding data where relevant. Just bear in mind as you're doing this that anybody who clicks on your profile can see this information. I've got my email address over here. I've got my phone number. If I go to the About Me section, this is where I can add in a few words about myself. Don't forget to click on the Save button to save your changes. We can also add things like projects that we've worked on in the past. So I can click in here and I can add a project title. And then all I need to do is click on Add Project to add that in. So you can really go through and build up a list so that people who are viewing your profile can see the types of project that you've worked on previously. If you want to remove anything, you can simply click on the cross. If I click in Add Skills, I'm going to say that Excel is one of my skills. Let's press Enter. Word is another one. PowerPoint is another one, so on and so forth. And you can also ask me about running. That's one of my hobbies. And also yoga. Scrolling down, we can add in our schools and education, and I will say that none of these are mandatory. You don't have to add this in. And we can also add some information about our interests and hobbies at the bottom. So you can really add as much or as little information as you like. And if you want to see somebody else's profile information, all you ever have to do at any given moment in time is simply click on them. So we can do that from within Delve. I can click on Adele and I can then view her profile, but we can basically click on anybody's name, no matter where we are in Microsoft 365, to view their profile. When we're working in SharePoint, and particularly when we're working in team sites that have pages, it's really important to understand the structure. And the structure of a SharePoint team site is very similar to the structure of any internet site. So on the screen right now, we just have a little diagram to help explain this. So at the top, we have our tenant. So that is normally our company name. And you can see at the top, I've used an example of a company that's called bargainholidays.com. So that's the company name, and everybody who works at that company will have an email address that ends with bargainholidays.com. And then underneath the tenant, we have the site. So someone might log into SharePoint and create a team site called Travel Handbook. And then within that site, we have various different site pages. So these are effectively web pages. So I might have a site page called Travel Guidelines, another one called Before You Go, another one called During Your Trip, and another one called After You Return. And those pages might have their own pages underneath them. So for example, if I wanted to navigate to the page Travel Guidelines and the subpage Air, the URL would look something like this. So we have our tenant, our company name first, we then have sites, and then Travel Handbook, that is the site name, and then site pages, Travel Guidelines, and then finally we get to the page related to air travel. So that is the structure of your SharePoint team sites. So let's take a look at that within the context of SharePoint. Now currently I'm not clicked on any site, so let's change that. Let's click on SMT Microsoft 365 Training Hub. So I am now in this specific team site. And if we take a look at the top here, there is my tenant name. We then have sites, and then I have the site name, SMT Microsoft 365 Training Hub. And if I click on anything and go to a different page, it's going to add that onto the end of the URL. Now we can see all of these pages and that site structure by clicking on the cog icon and going to Site Contents. Let's click on the link. It's going to jump us across to the contents of this site, and we have all of our different folders. So if we go to Site Pages, this is where you're going to be able to see all of the individual pages. Now notice here that I have two, even though I only have one page on this site currently. And the one page that I have is effectively the home page. So whenever you create a brand new site, you're automatically going to get a home page. If you make any changes to that homepage, then you could end up with effectively another version of the homepage like I have here. I applied a template to the homepage and republished it. Now I don't need both of these here. I could effectively remove the homepage because I'm just using this one just here. So if I select it and click on delete, I should find that that doesn't affect anything related to my site. Because if you take a look at the URL, this is the page we're actually using, learningteamhome.aspx. Now let's go back to the main start page and go into a different site. Let's go into Mark 8 Project Team. Now you can see here, instead of going up to the cog icon, we actually have access to the site contents in the left-hand navigation menu. So again, if I click on site contents, it's going to take me across to a similar screen where we can see all of the different folders. Now these other folders contain things like any documents we have uploaded, any site assets, images, things like that. Your pages will always live in the site pages folder. And you can see that for this one, I just simply have the home page because I haven't made any changes to it. So as we start adding pages to our site, you're going to see all of those in here. So just be aware of those points. It's really important to understand that structure and how everything ties together. SharePoint makes it really easy to search for and find content either within a site or across all sites that you have access to. So we're at the start screen. Remember, when we're working on this start screen, we're not in any particular site. Notice we have a search bar running across the top of the screen. Now, if we click our mouse in this search bar, we can pretty much search for anything from here. For example, if I type in the word, let's go for bees, you can see just there it's found a file that I uploaded, a Word document called The Fascinating World of Bees. What about if I type in something a bit more generic? Let's type in sales. Well, you can see what it's found. Well, you can see it's found a few more items. And the way that this search works is that it will categorize your search results depending on where it's found a hit. So you can see below we have sites, files, and people. So it's found 2 SharePoint sites that contain the word sales. So that would be right. We have one called US Sales and another called Sales and Marketing. It's found a Word document that's called Sales South. And it's found Isaiah because he has sales rep as his job title. Now, of course, if we want to jump directly to any of these, we can simply click. So maybe I want to go to the US Sales SharePoint site. I can click on my search result. It's going to open up a new tab, and I'm now working within that site. So nice and simple. What about if I click on Isaiah? What's that going to do? Well, that's going to do a search for Isaiah, and it's going to show me any content that Isaiah has created, and also stuff like his contact information. So there's his contact information. If I click on the organization tab, it's also going to show me other people that work at the organization where he works. I can even see the hierarchy, so I can see that Patty is the president, Miriam is the director, and Isaiah reports directly in to these two people. And then underneath that, we have all of Isaiah's colleagues. And if Isaiah had shared any content, we would have that listed underneath the content tab as well. So a really nice way to search. Now let's type in sales one more time, because what we can do is expand our search results. So if we click on show more results at the bottom here, we're going to get a more extensive set of search results. So the first tab is showing everything that it finds related to sales. And remember, this is across all of the sites that we have access to. So I have loads of stuff in here. Now, notice that it's not only picking up SharePoint sites, it's picking up things like OneNote notebooks. So you can see here, it's showing me that I have a OneNote notebook called Sales Team A. We have some filters at the top here, so if I want to refine these results even more, I can click the file type, and maybe I'm only interested in finding Word documents with the word sales in them. If I click on apply, it's going to narrow those results down and filter out everything that I'm not looking for. Click on the cross to remove the filter. I could even filter by the date last modified. So maybe I'm looking for something that was modified in the past month. I can select that, and it's going to show me all of the documents, the site pages, the notebooks that have been modified recently. Once again, click the cross to clear the filter. And then running across the top, this is where we can refine the list down again. So if I'm just interested in files, I could choose files. If I want to see the sites, I can click there. People. It's showing me who works in sales and marketing. I could go to news, no results there because we haven't really uploaded much content as yet. But hopefully you get the idea as to how powerful this search can be. And of course, if you want to refine it further, you might not necessarily want to search across all of your sites. If you jump into any of your sites, you can run your search from there. So let's go into a site. Now, we don't have a great deal of content to search through because this is a site that we've just built. But if I type in general and hit enter, you can see it's actually going to find that I have a general folder in the document library for this site. And if I click on this, it's going to jump me directly there into that general folder where shortly we will have some documents. So the main takeaways from this lesson are that you can search for pretty much anything. You can refine your search results, and you can either search across all of your sites or in specific sites only. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can post news to our team site. But before we do that, I'm going to make a change to the current site that we're working on. Because if you remember, when we created this site, I actually applied a template. And the template that we currently have applied to this site is a communication site template. Now, we've briefly spoken about communication sites. We are going to talk about them in more detail a bit later on in this section. But for this demonstration, I basically want to switch this back to using a team site template. Now, very simple to apply a different template. We just go up to the cog icon to open up the settings pane, and then we can say apply a site template. And I want to use the team site template. That is this one just here, team collaboration. Let's click on this and let's choose use template. So this is basically the default template when you create a team site if you don't add another template in the setup process. And what you'll notice about this template is that the news section is fairly prominent just here. In general, on the first page of our team sites, it's good to have the latest goings on, the latest news displayed. Of course, you can delete this if you don't want news displayed there. And in general, news is generally what you would have at the top of the first page of your site. Now, notice underneath news, we have an add button. If we click the drop down, we can add a news post or a news link. Now, it's important to differentiate between these two. If we create a news post, we're effectively creating a brand new page, and we need to design that news page. If we create a news link, we're linking to an external news source. Now we are going to do both of these. We're going to start with News Post. Now notice here we're creating a brand new page. If you think back to the layout, the structure of SharePoint, we have our home page and now we're creating a page off of that page. We have 3 templates. We can start from a blank, we can use the visual template or the basic text template. Now we're going to start from a blank. Let's select it and click on Create Post in the bottom corner. So now we're taken into that page and we can start designing it. Now I will say at this early stage of this course, we're not going to go full force into how to design pages, but I would like to just highlight a few things to get you used to designing your own site pages. So because we've selected a blank template, we don't have any kind of image at the top here. Notice that as I hover my mouse over different parts of this page, we get different things highlighting. And these are what we call web parts. And there are all different kinds of web parts that you can add to your site pages. Again, we'll look at that in detail a bit later on. But for the time being, we're going to edit this header web part. Notice we have a floating menu bar, and one of the options that we have is to browse images. So let's add a nice image to the header area just to jazz this up a little bit. So we can upload a file that we've used recently. We can browse the stock images library and choose an image from there. We can search the web. We can upload from OneDrive. If we have a file stored off locally on our PC, we can upload from there. I'm just going to add an image from the stock image library. So let's go to the Technology tab, and I think I'm just going to use this image. Why not? Let's click on Insert. So now I have that image there. I can also change the focal point of the image. Notice we have a Set Image Focal Point option on that floating toolbar. And this is just if I want to move this up or down. So let's take a look at this. I think I'm going to let's put it just there. We also have some layout options for this image. So currently we're looking at this in overlap layout, but I could go for image and title. We get something slightly different. I could go for plain, which removes the image entirely, or I could go for color block. Again, we get something completely different. Now I think I quite like overlap. It's also worth noting that we have an Edit Web Part button just here as well. And when we click on this, it's going to open up a pane on the right hand side. And in here, you'll find some of the same options. For example, we've got just our layout options just there. But we can also choose how we want this heading text, I should say, aligned. So currently it's aligned to the left. I could choose center to move that into the middle. And I think I'm going to do that. I can also choose to add some text above the title. So maybe I want this to say latest news. Check it out. Looks pretty good. I can also choose to show the publish date. So let's turn that on as well. And then finally at the bottom, we can add some alternative text, which is really helpful for people who are using screen readers. So I highly recommend that you do that. Once you're happy, you can close down this window and we can then go in and add a title. And the title of this page is going to be Latest Excel Updates. And I'm going to add my name into here because I'm the one who's creating this news page. Now, as we're making all of these changes, SharePoint is continuously saving our draft. You can see in the top corner, it says your draft has been saved. And I also have a Save as Draft button in the top left-hand corner as well. So that's an important point to note. Nothing that you're doing here is being published to the live site until you choose to post the news. So I could start working on this page before lunch. I could save it as a draft and then come back and work on it later before finally posting it at the end of the day. So just be aware of that. You need to actually post or publish the page for anyone to see the changes that you've made. Now, again, we're not going to go too far into page design at this stage, but I do just want to add some text so that we have something on this page. Now I'm just going to add some dummy text. We will change this later. Notice underneath I have a text web part. When I click in it, I get this big long formatting floating menu bar. And I'm just going to copy and paste in some text. And of course, once you have your text in, you can then use this formatting bar to make changes to it. So maybe I want to select this section just here and add some bullet points. The same goes for this just here. Let's add some bullet points, so on and so forth. Now let's just say that I'm off for lunch and I want to come back and work on this page before posting it. If I click on Save as Draft, it's going to save. I get a little preview as to what this is going to look like. And if I'm at the home screen here of my team site, you can see underneath activity, there is my page. Now, I'm the only one who's seeing this. Anybody else who has access to this site won't see it until I choose to post it. So when it comes time to post, I can click on the page to open it up, and now I can click on the Post News button. This time it's going to post it. Let's go back to home, and you can now see what that looks like. If we now go to Pages in the left-hand menu, we should find that we have a new page. There it is, latest Excel updates.aspx. That is the page that we've just created that we can access from the home page. Now, the other way that we can add a news post is directly linking to an external website. So let's just quickly do that. I'm going to go to Add, and this time we're going to choose News Link. And this is a simple case of just copying and pasting in the URL that you want to link to. So I have a link copied to my clipboard, so I simply need to Control V to paste it in. We're just linking to the Microsoft support site. Notice it adds a title and a description for me based on the information on that page. Obviously, you can edit all of these. I'm just going to leave them as they are and click on Post. And it's going to post that to the newsfeed, but we're accessing a link this time, as opposed to going to a page. In a previous lesson, we saw how we can create a team site. And in this lesson, I'm just going to very quickly show you how you can create a communications site. Now, just a reminder as to the difference between these two, a team site is very much for your team specifically to collaborate and share ideas. Whereas a communications site is a site that communicates something to the rest of the organization. So it might be that you work on a project within your team site, and then you announce the project via a communications site that everybody in the organization can see. So to create a communications site, we just jump up to the Create Site link, and instead of choosing Team Site, we want a communications site. Now, before we click, let's just read the information below, just to make it really clear what a communications site is. So it says a communications site is to share information that engages and informs viewers. We can create portals or subject-specific sites. We can engage dozens or thousands of viewers, and we'll probably have a few content authors and many site visitors. So we're going to choose communications site, and we can now give our site a name. So I'm going to call mine Microsoft 365 Training Schedule. So maybe with this project, we're sorting out what needs to be trained, who needs to be trained within our team site. And then when we're ready, we can publish the full training schedule of who's going to be trained and when. We can give our site a description. Just to save a bit of time, I'm not going to add this in. This is optional, but I do recommend that you do it. The language is English. Let's click on Finish. And that is pretty much as difficult as it gets. We've created our site. We can now start designing it. So once again, we're getting a similar choice. We can browse templates, or we can just start designing from scratch. Now I'm going to close this down this time because this is the default layout of a communications site. And everything you see on here will either link through to a page or an external link. So if I just click on this first big image just here, that's going to link me to an external site. And this actually goes to the Microsoft support page about SharePoint. And because this is a template, you'll find that pretty much all of these go to external links as opposed to news pages. And everything you see on here is customizable. And we're going to talk a lot about design when we get to that section of this course. But just so you know, if we look in the top right hand corner, notice we have an edit link just here. If we edit, that's going to allow us to edit this page. We're now in edit mode, and we can see the different web parts, and we can make various different changes. Now note here, when I click on this first web part, this first image, check out the floating toolbar. We have a lot more things on this than we did when we were looking at the last page. So we can edit the web part, we can duplicate the web part, we can delete it. We can choose if we want it to show in tiles or in layers. I think I like tiles a little bit better. And we can also customize how many tiles we want in this section. So currently I have 5 tiles showing. That's why we have these 5 images. But I could go for 3 instead, or maybe I just want 2, or maybe I only want 1. So all of this is entirely up to you. And remember, when you're clicked up here, you are simply editing this one web part. If I wanted to edit something else down the page, for example, this news area a bit further down, I would need to click in this area and then I get a floating toolbar related to the formatting of this section of the page. Now, something else worth noting ahead of the lessons on design, not only do we have this little floating toolbar when we click on a web part, we also have a little floating toolbar down the side of each section. So the page is divided into sections, and you'll see these little plus symbols as you scroll down the page. So this is where you can come if you want to add an entirely new section and fill it with some other information. We can edit the section, we can move sections around, we can duplicate sections and also delete them. So just bear that in mind when we get to the section on design. But in terms of creating a communication site, that's pretty much it. It's then down to you to customize how you want it to look. I'm going to click on the Republish button in the top corner to publish the changes that I've made. And then if we click back on Home to take us to the SharePoint Start page, you'll now see at the top in the following section, because I created the communications side, it's added it straight into Following, which makes it super easy for me to get back to the page. It's time now to do exercise 2. And in exercise 2, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learnt in this section of the course. And this section was about getting started with SharePoint. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just simply open SharePoint Online and make sure that you're logged in. And I'd like you to ensure that you're familiar with the interface so you know where everything is. I'd like you to think about updating your profile. So consider updating your information or maybe even adding in a photo. Once you've done that, I'd like you to create a new team site, and I'd like you to call it Contoso Travel. Once you have that site created, I'd like you to add 2 news posts, and I'd like you to add news post links. And for this, I'd just like you to select 2 travel websites that you're familiar with to use as the links in the news area. That's it for this exercise. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing I asked you to do was to make sure that you're logged into your Microsoft 365 account. So to do that, you can simply go to office.com and then type in your email address and password to log in. If you've logged in previously, it will recognize you like mine has just here. So all I need to do is click on Sign In. Now, once we're at the Microsoft 365 Start page, to open SharePoint, we click on the App Launcher in the top corner and we can choose SharePoint from the list. And the first thing I asked you to do here was just to make sure that you're familiar with the interface. So make sure you know where to go to search. You can see we have a search bar in the top. Make sure you understand what these different areas are on the left-hand side. For example, Following, Recent, Saved for Later. Make sure you know where you can go to access your settings. So by clicking on the cog icon in the top right-hand corner. And then make sure you understand what you can see in the main portion of this screen. I then asked you to consider updating your profile. And that's a very simple task to do. All we need to do is click on our profile in the top right-hand corner and go to My Microsoft 365 Profile. This is going to jump us into Microsoft Delve, and from here we can click the Update Profile button, and that's going to allow us to modify any piece of information we like. And also, if we want to change our photo, we can simply click on the camera icon just here to upload a brand new photo. The next thing I asked you to do was to create a new team site called Contoso Travel. So from the SharePoint Start page, we're going to click on the Create Site button. We're going to create a team site and we're going to call it Contoso Travel. Now, I didn't ask you to modify any other settings. I didn't specify if this should be a private or a public site. So I don't really mind what you selected down here. As long as you've got your site named, let's click on Next. Now, depending on where you're doing this, if you're doing this at your organization, your colleagues might be fine for you to start adding them so you can practice. If not, you don't actually have to add any members if you don't want to. You can simply click on Finish. Now, I'm going to add just a couple. Let's add Adele, and I'm going to add Lee. And click Finish. So SharePoint's going to go away and it's going to create my brand new site. Let's close down some of these pop-ups. There we go. The final part of this exercise was to add 2 news posts. And I said that I didn't mind which websites you used. Just make sure they're sort of travel related to keep within the theme of the site that we're creating. So let's click the drop down underneath News and we're going to add a news link. Notice the link pane opens up on the right hand side and I have a link copied to the clipboard. I'm going to Control V to paste that in. It's going to go away, grab the page information. We could change the image if we wanted to. I'm just going to post these as is. And then we're going to add another one, another news link. I have another link pasted to the clipboard. It's going to grab the information and we're going to choose post. And that was all I needed you to do for this exercise. I'll see you in the next section. So now that we've nailed some of the basics of working in SharePoint, it's time to move on to talking about lists. Because lists are a fundamental part of working in SharePoint. Now, I think on the face of it, most of us are familiar with what a list is, but let's just quickly take a look at it in the context of SharePoint. And to do this, I'm actually going to flip across to Excel because I feel it's a little bit easier to understand. So I have this workbook. It's called Employee Skill Levels. And what you can see in this workbook on this particular worksheet is basically just a list, but in Excel. So a list generally has a table structure where we have column headings at the top, and then we have various different rows or records. And in this case, each record is related to one employee. So this is a list of all of the employees, and we have 100 or so records in here. We can see the date that they were hired, the department they're in, their job title, their location, their extension number, their skill level in terms of Microsoft Office, and if they are a manager or not. So you will find that you will have lists and tables like this scattered across not just Excel, but many other applications. You might have another list in Word, for example. Now we can store this type of list information in SharePoint. Now, if I wanted to store this list information in SharePoint, there are a couple of different ways that I could do it. The first method is I could upload the entire Excel file. But what that means is that when somebody wants to view this list, they can open the file from within the SharePoint document library, but the list still exists in Excel as opposed to SharePoint. So let's take a look at that example first. So I'm back in SharePoint now. I'm going to open up my Microsoft 365 Training Hub page, and I'm going to upload that Excel document into the document library for this team site. So if we scroll down, here is my document library. Now, if when you're working with the document library, you find this little window down here a little bit too small, because this is effectively just a web part on this start page, you can simply create a link to the full document library so it opens up in the full screen and add it into the navigation. So let me just very quickly show you how to do that. We're going to jump up to the cog to jump into settings, and we're going to go back to site contents. Now, once we're in here, if we click on documents, this is basically our document library page. So you can see that is a much bigger version of that smaller web part. Now, I want to be able to get to here quickly because I find the larger version easier to work with. So what we can do once we've navigated here is we can copy the URL, Control C, and then we can simply edit the navigation menu by clicking the edit button. And if we hover our mouse at the bottom of the last menu item, you can see here it says add a link or label to the navigation. So we're going to add a link, and then we're going to paste in the address, Control V, and you can choose if you want it to open in a new tab or not. So I'm going to say yes, open in a new tab, and the display text is going to be Document Library. Click on OK and click on Save. So now if we're on our home page and we want to upload something into the document library, we can simply click on the link and it's going to open in a new tab in that full page view. So now that we're in here, I'm going to open up the general folder and I'm going to upload that Excel file that I have saved off to my PC. And you'll find this file in the course files folder. It's called employee skill levels.xlsx. Let's click on open to upload that into the document library. So that list effectively now exists in SharePoint. If we go back to the home page, if I need to see that list, I can go down to my documents web part, I can click on general, and I can click on employee skills level. It's going to open the Excel spreadsheet in a brand new tab, and then we can work on it. Now that's a perfectly valid method, but you can also create lists natively within SharePoint and add lots of different types of functionality to them. So when people want to edit them, they don't have to come out to Excel to do that. They can do it from within SharePoint. And if we go back to the main home screen of our SharePoint site and click the new drop-down, you can see the first item that we have is List. And that's how we're going to continue in the next lesson. In the previous lesson, we explored what lists are, and we took a look at a list in Microsoft Excel. Now, we ended that lesson by highlighting the fact that you can create lists that are native to SharePoint as opposed to just uploading the Excel document that contains the list. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can create a native SharePoint list and import that data from the Excel file. So we're back in our Microsoft 365 Training Hub team site, and notice at the top here we have a new drop-down. Now, if we click this drop-down, we can create various different things within our team site. And the first one in the list is List. So let's click to open that up. Now, you'll see in here that there are 4 different ways that you can create a native SharePoint list. We can create a blank list from scratch. We can create a list based off of a list that already exists in any SharePoint site. We can create a list from Excel, or we could choose a template from below. Now, in this lesson, we're going to import our Excel data. So I'm sure you can tell which option we're going to select. It's this one here from Excel. Now, this is just a simple case of either uploading the file, or if you do have the file stored in your SharePoint document library, you can navigate to the folder that you saved it into. Now, we did upload that to the General folder. So let's click on General. There it is. All I need to do is select the file and then click on Next at the bottom. Now, the next thing to check here are the data types at the top. So each column contains data, and we just need to make sure that we have the correct data types selected for that column. Now, for this first column, it's showing as title. You'll find that generally the first column will always show as title. That is fine. We could change this to single line of text. That accurately describes the type of data we have in this column as well. Now, notice the hire date column, we have some random numbers. Now, these aren't really as random as they seem. If you're fairly familiar with Excel, you'll know that dates are simply numbers in Excel that have been formatted. And the number that you see is basically the number of days past the 1st of the 1st, 1900. Now, as this data has been imported into SharePoint, it's lost that date formatting, so we're just seeing the number. Now, if we click the drop down, we do have a date and time data type in here. Now, if we switch it to date and time, the date looks fine, but we're also getting a random time in here as well. Now, I don't want to include the time, I just want the date. Now, there's no way to do that from this area just here. We're going to have to deal with that afterwards. So we're going to leave it like this for the time being, and I'll show you how to remove the time in a moment. Now, the rest of these I think are all pretty good. So we have single line of text for all of these. That's correct. Number for extension number is fine. Single line of text, single line of text. I'm happy with that. Let's click on Next. Now we get the opportunity to name our list. I'm going to keep it on employee skill levels, but I'm going to add on the front here that it is a list, so it's easy for me to identify. As always, I would recommend adding a description. I'm not going to save a bit of time, and I am going to add this list into my main site navigation on the left-hand side to make it quicker to access. Let's click on Create. So SharePoint is going to go away, it's going to import that list information, and the screen will refresh, and we should now see that list in the left-hand menu. There it is. And our list now exists natively within SharePoint as opposed to in an external Excel file. So now that we have this list in SharePoint, let's deal with this hire date column. If we click the drop-down next to hire date, go to Column Settings and Edit, this is going to open up a pane on the right hand side. Now, the type in here is date and time, but we also get a little toggle slider which allows us to define if we want to include the time or not. So currently mine is set to yes, so I'm just going to slide this to no and click on Save. The screen will refresh, and now we just get those dates. Now, another question that always comes up is that people always want to know how to change the format of these dates. At the moment, we have it in a longer format, July the 5th, 2011. Maybe you just want it to say 7/5/11. Now this is where we get into custom columns, and we're going to be covering that later on in the course. So we will revisit this. For the time being, we're just going to leave it as it is. Now let's scroll across and see if there's anything else we need to do in these columns. Now look at this, extension number. The data type for this column was number, and so it's added a comma as if it's an actual number as opposed to an extension number. Again, we can change this by clicking the drop down, going to column settings and edit. So I'm going to keep this on number, that's fine. Number of decimal places, well, I'm going to put that down to 0, just so it doesn't cause us an issue further down the line. And if we expand more options, notice that I have a little slider for thousand separator. So I'm going to turn this off. Let's click on save. And we should find that the page refreshes, and these now look more like extension numbers as opposed to actual numbers. So my list is looking pretty good. A couple of other points to note at this stage. I'm going to select, and I can choose any column here. Let's click the drop down. I'm going to go to column settings and let's go to format this column. Now, if we go to format view, we've got a couple of options we can change in here. Now, for example, we can change the layout. So we have our list in a very traditional layout at the moment. But if we wanted to, we could choose to display our list items as a gallery. So now each employee is represented as a card. And then underneath we have a card designer. So we can say edit card and we can make various different changes just here. So we can basically choose what information we want to display on each card. Now I'm going to keep mine as a list. And you could make this look very similar to an Excel table by applying banded rows. So that's this option here, alternating row styles. Let's choose it. I get that nice grey banding, which makes my data a lot easier to read. And if I don't like the grey, I can edit the row styles, and I can choose a colour for odd rows and even rows. So if we click the format button, maybe I want these in a nice yellow colour. And maybe I want my even rows in a green colour. Now, I don't actually like that very much. Let's just put that back to automatic. And I think I'm going to set this back to grey. But just know that you can change it from there. Click on save to save your changes. So that's pretty much it. That's how you can import a list into SharePoint from an Excel document and how you can make some basic formatting changes. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can create a list in SharePoint by importing a list from Excel. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can create a list from scratch natively within SharePoint and how you can customize the columns and create things like drop-down lists to make data entry really simple. So from the new drop-down, we're going to go to list again, but this time we're going to choose blank list. Now, the first thing we need to do is decide on a name for our list. So just to stick with our naming convention, I'm going to make sure it says list at the start. And this is going to be a list of staff members and what applications they've been trained on. So I'm going to call this the completed training list. Once again, I highly recommend you add a description. I'm not going to save a bit of time. And I am going to show this list in the site navigation. Let's click on create. Now with this type of list, there's nothing to import, so we're just going to get the basic skeleton of a blank list. And that basic skeleton is just effectively one column with the option to add more columns. So by default, the one column that you get is going to be called title. But if we click the drop down and go to column settings, we can rename this. So I want this first column to be called employee name. Let's click on save. Now, if we just go back in here again and go to column settings and format this column, now I can go in and add more columns. Now, if I click on add column, notice we get a choice of the type of column that we want to create. Now, some of these are very obvious. Maybe we want to create a column where people just type in text. Maybe they're going to add a number. Maybe they're going to add in currency or locations. But we do have some other really interesting things in here, such as choice. And that's what we're going to use for this column. Because basically what I want to happen here is I want to be able to select a Microsoft application from a list as opposed to typing it in. Because when you're making selections from a list, it means that you're going to enter it correctly each and every time. So if you're the administrator and you're the one creating this list, it's always good to make your lists as error-free as possible. If people can type in whatever they like and somebody makes a spelling mistake, that's going to make your results inaccurate, particularly if you want to start doing things like filtering your list or searching. So let's choose Choice and click on Next. So now we get our Create a Column pane pop out on the right-hand side. So the name field is basically the name of the column. So I want this to say Application. Again, you could add a description. I'm not going to. The type is Choice, and now we can enter in the different choices. So choice 1 is going to be Excel. Choice 2 is going to be Word. Choice 3, that's going to be PowerPoint, and we can add more choices simply by clicking the Add Choice button. Let's add Outlook. Let's add, what else should we add? OneNote. And let's also add SharePoint. Why not? Now, notice that as I'm adding these, they kind of have this background fill color. And of course, you can change this. If you notice to the right-hand side, we have a little color palette. When we click, we can change the color of our drop-down lists. So let's use this second row of colors. So we'll go blue, we'll go purpley color. We'll just go through so that these look quite nice next to each other, like so. And of course, if you want to remove any of your choices once you've added them, you can click on the cross, and you can also reorder things by dragging and dropping using this little waffle icon just here. So if I grab SharePoint, I can move it up one, grab it again to move it down one. Now, I don't want people to be able to add their own values manually. I want to have this list so that they have to select something from the drop-down as opposed to typing their own choice in. So I'm not going to select this checkbox just here. Now, the default value is what do I want it to display when they haven't yet made a choice. Now, I don't want it to display anything, so I'm going to keep it on none. Now, we do have some more options down here related to how we want to display these choices. So we can choose to have drop-down menus, or we can choose radio buttons. Now, I want a nice drop-down menu, so I'm going to keep it on that. Can they select multiple? Well, yes, I'm going to let them, because these employees need to be trained on multiple applications. So instead of having their name repeated for each application, I just want to be able to add all of the applications in one record. So let's say yes, we're going to allow multiple selections. Require that this column contains information. Well, no, they don't necessarily have to have something in the column to be able to save, and that's all I'm going to change in there. Let's click on Save at the bottom. So now we have 2 columns. That's all I'm going to add at the moment. So if somebody else who is part of this team comes in and they want to start adding people to this list, all they need to do is click on Edit in Grid View, and they can add the employee name. Now I'm just going to add my name for argument's sake. This is just a free text field. I can press Tab, but when I click in the application field, I get that drop-down list. So I can now choose the applications that I've been trained on. And because I selected multiple, I can choose Excel, let's say Outlook, and SharePoint, and click on the tick. I can then add a new item and add the next person. And this time we're just going to select PowerPoint and click on the tick. And I could carry on going. Once I'm happy with my items, I can exit the grid view, and there we go. Now for this, I'm going to widen this column out simply by dragging it so that these are all on one line, because I think that looks a little bit neater. Let's add one more column so that you kind of get the hang of this. Let's click Add Column again, and this time I'm going to add a yes/no column type. Let's click on Next. Because what I want to show in this column is if they've completed all of their training. So the name of this column is going to be completed. The type is yes/no, and we'll have the default value as yes. Again, if we expand more options, we can see other things that we can do. So require that this column contains information. So I'm going to say yes, that is required. Let's click on Save. So now check out what happens. Because I haven't added anything in here, it's flagging that this is required information. So I'm going to go into Edit in Grid View. Let's go to Completed, and it gives me a little checkbox so I can say, yes, this has been completed. Exit Grid View, and there we go. Now, if you don't like this required info in there, you would just go back in to the column settings, expand more options, and turn off this little checkbox and click on Save. So instead of that yellow flag, you're just going to have nothing in there. So this is a really good way to build fully functional lists from within SharePoint. So far in this section, we've taken a look at 2 different ways to create lists in SharePoint. And now we're going to take a look at the last 2 options. So let's go into New, let's select List, because there are 2 in here that we haven't yet spoken about. From Existing List and also from a template. Now let's deal with From Existing List first of all, because this is going to be very, very quick. When we click on From an Existing List, what we're basically going to get here is a list of all of the SharePoint sites that we have access to, and we can choose to create a list based off of an existing list. So for example, I'm clicked on the SharePoint team site that we're currently working on, and you can see the 2 lists that I've created so far. But if I click on some of these other sites, and I think most of these don't have any lists. Let's go to Mark 8 Project Team. I can see that here we have a content list and a service desk list. So I could choose to create a new list in this site based off of a list in another site. So if we select Content List and click on Next, it's going to ask us to give our list a name. I'm going to leave this on Content List, but I am going to add List onto the front. Let's show it in Site Navigation, click on Create, and it's basically going to import the template of that list. So we're not going to get the content, but we are going to get all of these customized headings. And we can then edit in Grid View and start to add our list items. So just be aware of that, really nice and straightforward. Now let's go back to Home and let's take a look at creating a list from a template. Once again, we're going to go to New and List. And in this section at the bottom, we can choose a template to create a list from. Now, once again, it is worth noting that if we choose, let's go for Issue Tracker, for example, we get the template loaded up into the preview window so we can kind of see what that looks like. But a lot of people think that when they choose this template, they're going to get all of the data as well. Now, you don't actually get the data, you don't get the records. This is really just a template for these column headings again. It will also bring across things like the drop-down menus as well, so you don't have to go in and create those. Of course, you can modify everything that you see on this template, but it does give you a little bit of a head start if this is the type of list that you want to create. So this is an issue tracker list. This would work pretty well with the content that we have. So I'm going to say, yes, let's use this template. I'm going to leave it as issue tracker, but we're going to call it list on the front here and click on create. So now we can go in and add some information. So let's just say Word crashing, issue description. Word keeps crashing whenever I save a long document. Now, when I click in the priority field, notice I get a drop down with some choices. So this is what I mean. This has been pre-populated into the template. So I could say that this is a high priority problem. If I click in status, again, I have some choices in here. So let's say that this is in progress. I can assign this to someone. So let's just type in someone's name. I'm going to go for Adele. Date reported. We have a calendar icon. Again, this is pre-populated. We're going to say it was reported today. Issue source, this has been set up as a link field, so we can add in some links in here. Maybe if we have a link to the actual document that's crashing, we could add in the OneDrive link, the SharePoint link, and then display some alternative text. Now, we're not going to do that. Let's scroll across. You can see this pretty much is fairly standard. This one's been set up as an image field, so when we click on it, we can add an image if that's going to help, so on and so forth. So that's basically how a template works. It's basically just the column headings are already pre-populated along with some of those drop-down menus and other data types. Let's exit out of Grid View, and that is it. We now have 4 lists in our navigation menu. When working with lists in SharePoint, we have some tools at our disposal that are going to help us organize our list information. And those tools would be Sort, Filter, and Group. So I'm currently clicked on the employee skill levels list, and we can see all of our lovely information in here. Now, currently, this list isn't sorted in any particular order. If you take a look at the first column, for example, these aren't in alphabetical order. And the same goes for any of these other columns. Now, we can sort our data, and if you're used to using things like sort in an application like Excel, it does work slightly differently. So let's take a look at sorting. Maybe I want to sort this list alphabetically by the employee's name. So if you take a look at the title heading just here, you can see we have a little drop down arrow. If we click that, it's going to reveal our sorting and filtering options. And we only have two sorting options. We can choose to sort A to Z or Z to A. So I'm going to sort mine A to Z. The list is going to refresh, and now you can see it's sorting that alphabetically by the first name. Now, one thing that's worth noting here is that we don't have any type of clear sort button. So once you've applied a sort, we can't then clear it and put the list back to how it was originally. If we want to sort it by something else, we would just need to sort on a different column. For example, maybe I then want to sort by job title A to Z. Now, another thing that differs in the way that sorting works in SharePoint to something like Excel is that we can't apply multiple sorts to columns. So currently I'm sorting A to Z by the title column, but I can't then say sort A to Z by job title as a secondary sort. If I sort A to Z by job title, it is just going to sort on that column. It's not going to take into account the previous sort I did in the other column. And you can see that illustrated quite nicely here. If we look at the job title brand manager, we have 3 people. Now in Excel, if I'd done this, because I'd applied an A to Z sort to the title column, the brand managers would be listed in alphabetical order. So we'd have Dwayne first, then Ronnie, then Tiffany. But that doesn't work the same in SharePoint, so just be aware of that. Now, it is possible to sort on 2 columns, and we're going to take a look at that a little bit later on. So those are really the only options you have when it comes to sorting lists of data. Now, what about filtering? Filtering allows us to filter out records that we're not particularly interested in and only view the information of most importance. So if we scroll across, let's go to the skill level column and click the drop down. We have a filter by option. So I'm going to click filter by. It's going to open up a pane on the right hand side, and I can now choose which skill level I'm most interested in. So maybe I only want to see employees who have a basic skill level. I can choose basic, click on apply, it's going to apply that filter, and that is literally all I'm going to see. It's going to filter out anybody whose skill level was intermediate or advanced. Now with filters, we do have a clear option. Notice on the right hand side, we have a clear filters button. Let's click it to put everything back into the list. Let's go to the job title column this time. Let's go to filter by. Here we have all of the job titles, and I can go through and I can select multiple if I want to. Or alternatively, we can click up in the find field and we can type in whatever it is that we're looking for. So if I type in manager, it's going to show me all of the job titles that have manager in them, and I can then choose the one that I'm interested in. So maybe brand manager. And I can then choose the one that I'm interested in. So maybe brand manager, it's going to select it. If I want all the managers, I can go in and I can select them, click on apply to apply that filter, and now I'm seeing all of the managers across all of the different departments. Notice also that when you have a sort or a filter applied to a column, we can see that indicated in the column header. So the job title column, I've sorted it and I have a filter applied, and we can see a little filter icon and also an up arrow. Let's clear the filter. Now, the final thing to talk about in this lesson is grouping. We can group our lists based on any of these fields. So maybe I want to group this time by location. If I click the drop down, notice we have a group by location option. Now, when I select that, you can see what it does. It's now grouping everybody based on where they're located. So we have location Frankfurt. There are 20 employees in Frankfurt. If we scroll down, the next group is London. We have 38 employees in London. Scroll down a bit further, we have New York, so on and so forth. And the thing with these groups is that they are collapsible and expandable. So I can click on the arrow to collapse those groups up and maybe just focus in on the location that I'm interested in. Now, it's also worth noting that you can sort grouped items as well. So now that I have these grouped, maybe I want to sort them alphabetically. So if I go to title A to Z, it's going to do that again. We have Frankfurt at the top, but now all of the employees are sorted into alphabetical order. And if we want to remove the grouping, if we just go back to the column where we applied the grouping, which in this case is location, we just need to uncheck group by location. So that is how you can sort, filter, and group list items in SharePoint. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can work with list views in SharePoint. So once again, we're working with the employee skill levels list. And what you'll notice is that when you're working inside any list, if you take a look in the top corner, you can see that the default view is what we call all items. And this basically means what it says on the tin. It's going to show all items in the list by default. And you'll find that all items is the default view for any list that you jump into. So if I was to jump into another list, so let's go into completed training. We don't have a great deal of information in there, but check it out in the top corner. All items is also selected because it's the default. Now it might be that we want to create different views for different lists. Now when you're thinking about working with views, you're going to find all of your view options underneath this all items drop down. And you can see we have a few different things in this menu. Now before we get on to creating a view, let's just deal with what we have in the top half of this menu: list, compact list, and gallery. So by default, I'm seeing all of my list items in list view. Now I could switch this to compact list. Now I don't know if you noticed that because it's very subtle, but compact list really just applies a different way of viewing our list items. We have less room in between each list item, which means we can fit more on the page. So this is quite useful if you have very long lists and you want to see as many items on the page as possible. So don't forget that compact list view is there. We also have a gallery view, and if we switch into that, we're going to see each list item shown as a card as opposed to a row or a record. Now which one of these you choose is entirely up to you. I'm going to jump back to the default, which is list. Now let's click the drop down once again. We can see we have all items selected, but check out what we have underneath. We can create new views. Now in order to create a new view, you kind of need to set up your list to reflect how you want to view it before you create the view. So it might be that I'm the manager of the European region, and so I'm only interested in the employees who are in European-based offices. So for this list, that's going to be everybody in London and everybody in Frankfurt. So what I would do here is before I create the view, I would filter this list. So we're going to go to the location column. Let's choose filter by, and I just want to see Frankfurt and London. Let's apply the filter. So now I have the view that I essentially want. I can save the view. So let's click the drop down. We're going to say save view as, and now I can give my view a name. So I'm going to call this European region only. Now notice underneath we have a checkbox that says make this a public view. And what that means is that if this view is made public, anybody who has access to this SharePoint site is going to be able to switch between this view. It means they don't have to create this view from scratch. So that's super helpful. Let's leave that ticked and click on save. So now my view is saved, and you can see up here, instead of saying all items, it now says European region only. If I want to switch back to all items, I can simply click the drop down and click all items. So it now serves as a nice little toggle, and I can view my list in either of these views. Now, when we created the European region only view, we filtered the list and then we saved the view. But we do also have a create new view button. Now this kind of works in a similar way. You need to apply your filters and sort your list before you create the new view. So maybe this time I want to have a view that only shows people with an advanced skill level. So once again, I'd need to come to the skill level column. We're going to say filter by. We're going to choose advanced and click on apply. Now that I have the list filtered, I can jump back into here and I can create a new view. I can give my view a name. I'm going to call it advanced skill level, but this time we can specify if we want to show our items in a list, in a calendar, in a gallery, or in a board. Now I'm going to stick with list. I'm going to make this a public view. Let's click on create. So once again, that does exactly the same thing. I can now switch between all three of these views. Now, what about if you apply a view, so let's say advanced skill level, and then you think to yourself, actually, you know what, I don't need this view, I want to delete it. How do we delete views that we've created? Well, if I wanted to delete the advanced skill level view, if I click the drop down and go to edit current view, this is going to take me into the back end of SharePoint. This is all the stuff that kind of sits under the interface. So I'm now editing the view, and the first button we have at the top here is a delete button. So if I click on delete and click on OK, it's going to delete that view. And let's just go back to the drop down to confirm, yes, that is gone. Now that editing area that we were just in, that can be used for a lot more than just simply deleting views. So let's switch into our European region only view again, and we're going to edit the current view to jump back into that window. So from here, I can make all different kinds of changes to the view. I could rename it from here. I could even go in and choose additional columns of information to display. So you can see everything that's ticked, those are the current columns that I'm seeing in this view. And you'll also notice that we have their position number from the left as well. So if you wanted to reorder your columns, you could do that from here simply by choosing a new position for each column heading. Now we're not going to do that. Notice that we can add lots of other columns as well. So let's add, I'm going to add an attachments column just here. If we scroll down, we can determine how we want to sort this view. Now I mentioned earlier when we were talking about sorting that you can't sort on multiple columns, but this is where you can do this. So what I could say here is first sort by the column title. I want them in ascending order, and then I can sort by the column location, for example, and I want those in ascending order. And then underneath that, we have the filters that we have applied to this view. And again, we can change these filters from here if we need to. So you can see that currently this view is being filtered by location equal to Frankfurt and location equal to London. Because if you remember, when I applied the filters, we were filtering for the European region only. And once again, you can go in and you can change all of this information. Now underneath that, we have a whole host of other things that we can do with this view, but these are outside the scope of this course. So we're just going to leave our view like this, and we're going to click on OK. So now if we take a look at our list, you can see that locations are London and Frankfurt, so Europe only. And because we applied a sort to columns, the first column being the title column, you can see that those names are sorted A to Z. And then we had a secondary sort on the location column, and we can see that this column is sorted as well. Did you know that you can apply conditional formatting to lists in SharePoint? Well, if you didn't, that is exactly what this lesson is going to be about, because we haven't really spoken about formatting lists in too much detail. Now, I'm currently clicked on the employee skill levels list, and I have selected the all items view. So this is just the default view. Now, the only other thing that I've done to this list is I've sorted it A to Z by the title column. So we have all of these names in alphabetical order. Now, the other thing that you might notice about this list is that we have what we call banded rows, and that is these grey alternating rows. Now, again, this might be a concept that you're already familiar with if you've spent quite a bit of time working with other applications like Excel. Banded rows in general make your data a lot easier to read. So a lot of people really like to have banded rows turned on, some people don't. Now, if you're wondering where the setting is to control these banded rows, you're going to find it underneath the All Items drop-down in Format Current View. So let's click to open this pane on the right-hand side, and what you'll notice straight away is that alternating row styles is selected. So simply by selecting this option, it's going to apply these grey banded rows. Now, it might be that you want your banded rows in a completely different color. If that's the case, we can edit our row styles, and we can choose a color for odd rows and a color for even rows. So maybe I want my odd rows to be in a pale blue, and I want my even rows to be in, let's do something that's quite different, a pale peach. Now, I'm not saying that that is the greatest looking list you've ever seen, but hopefully you get the idea as to how you can modify this. Now, if you don't like this, you can simply reset to the default style. Notice we have a link for that at the bottom. So I'm going to click Reset to Default Style. It's going to take it back to the very simple grey and white. So that is how you can determine what colour the odd and even rows are in your list. Now, if you don't like this banded row style at all, you can simply deselect alternating row styles and it's going to remove that row banding entirely. Now, aside from just regular formatting of banded rows, we can also utilize conditional formatting. And again, this might be a term that you've heard if you use an application like Excel. Now, conditional formatting will apply a background color to a row depending on criteria that we specify. For example, maybe I want to apply a background color to all rows where the department is equal to admin. So let's take that example and let's apply it. So I'm going to choose conditional formatting just here. And the first thing we need to do is specify how we want to show all values. So by default, we've got this grey background fill. Now, if you don't like that, you can click on the little text button just here. And I'm going to say no style. I don't want a background color for all of the rest of my values that don't match my rule. So now we're going to add our rule and we're going to say if the department column is equal to, and we're going to type admin. Now notice underneath we have an add condition. So if we wanted to add another condition, we could. So I could say if the department is equal to admin and the location is equal to London, apply this color. And we'll do that in a moment just so you can see how that works, but for the time being, let's just stick to one rule. I can then choose the color of the background fill. So I'm going to click the little text icon. Let's change this to let's go for a purpley color like so. Click on save. And what we should find is that rule has now been applied. So every time we have somebody in the admin department, that row is highlighted in the list. Now let's jump back into conditional formatting. Let's click on Manage Rules because we can go back in here and we can change whatever rule we like. So there is my rule at the top. Let's click the three dots. I'm going to say Edit Rule. And let's add in another condition. So we want to say if the department is equal to, let's actually change this. We'll go for marketing. And if the location column is equal to London. And let's change the background fill. Let's go for a green this time. Click on save, close the pane down, and now we have two rules in action. So it's only going to highlight records where the department is marketing and the location is London. So you can see we've got one just there. Do we have any more? Let's scroll down. Yep, we've got a few more down here. So we can build up our conditional formatting rules. We're not just stuck with one condition. Now let's just go back into formatting again. Let's manage our rules and we're going to edit the rule. Because notice in here, as well as is equal to, we also have is not equal to. So I could say here is not equal to New York. So essentially what's different here is that it's going to apply the formatting to all records that are in the marketing department and records where the location is London or Frankfurt. We want everything that is not equal to New York. Let's click on Save again and close this down. And we should find that we pick up some Frankfurt records in here as well, which we do. You can see there is one just there. There's some more Frankfurt records. And we also have London records. The final thing to really show you here is how you can delete a conditional formatting rule that you've set up. So maybe I decide that I don't want to apply this anymore. We're going to go into Format Current View. We're going to manage our rules. We're going to click the three dots and we have a delete rule option in here. So I'm going to delete out this rule. I'm going to go back and I'm going to say reapply my alternating row styles. Let's click on Save, and that's how you can format your rows and also utilize conditional formatting in SharePoint lists. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can import a custom list into SharePoint. And the list that we're going to import is a list from Excel. Now, the reason why I'm using Excel is because Excel is an extremely popular application when it comes to creating tables and lists. A lot of the time, people will work predominantly in Excel when they're doing things like building an attendance log or creating any other type of list. And what we can do here is we can create a connection between an Excel spreadsheet and SharePoint so that when somebody changes the list in SharePoint, all we need to do is come back to Excel, refresh this table, and the changes will also update in the Excel worksheet. So in order to do this, we need to create a connection between SharePoint and our Excel spreadsheet. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this lesson. So I have my list open in Excel, and this is just an attendance log. So we can see the employees, we can see if they've attended, and we can see the course date. Now, a couple of things that I've done to this data prior to importing. I've put the data into a table. Now, if you're not that familiar with Excel, to put any type of data into an Excel table, you simply need to press the Control-T keyboard shortcut. Once you have your data in a table, you're going to have a table design ribbon at the top. And I highly recommend that in this first group just here, where we have table name, you give your table a meaningful name. You can see I've called mine attendance log. If we don't give our table a name, it's just going to be generically named Table 1, Table 2, Table 3, so on and so forth. It's also worth noting with these table names that you can't have any spaces in the name. So you can see that I've made attendance log all one word. Alternatively, you could separate the words with an underscore. So now that we've prepped our data, we can create a link to our SharePoint site. Now to do this, we need to go onto the table design ribbon, and this is the option that we want, the export option. Because notice the first option in here is export table to a SharePoint list. So let's click this. It's going to open up the export table to SharePoint list wizard. And we're currently working on step 1 of 2. So the first thing we need to define here is where do we want to publish our table, and then we have a field for the address. Now the address is basically the address of our SharePoint site. So let's jump back to SharePoint and just grab the URL. So this is the site that I want to import it into, the Microsoft 365 Training Hub. I'm going to go up to the URL bar, click to highlight, Control-C to copy, and then jump back to Excel. Now I can click in this field, and we can Control-V to paste that in. Now, if I want to create a read-only connection, meaning that people can't change the data, they can only view it, I would select the checkbox underneath. Now, we're not going to do that because I want people to be able to make changes and have it update. We then need to provide a name and a description for our table. So the name is going to be attendance log, and let's add a quick description. List to show all employees who have attended training. Let's click on next. Now what you're going to see in step 2 is basically Excel trying to match the data types. Now it's worth noting that the data types that you find in Excel are different to the data points that you find in SharePoint. So data types within Excel would be things like general, text, short date, currency, those formats that you might be used to using. Whereas in SharePoint, we have things like text, single line. Now, all you really need to do here is go through each of your column headings, and these are the column headings that we have in the Excel spreadsheet, and make sure that the data type that it's picked up corresponds to the type of information that we have in these columns. So I can see that for most of these, we have text single line. And if I look at the employee column, the job title column, location and attendance, these are all text, so that is fine. For the course date column, it's picked up that this is a date data type, and again, that is correct. So all I need to do here is click on Finish. Now Excel is going to go away, and it's going to create that connection in the form of a query between the Excel spreadsheet and SharePoint. And you can see here I'm now getting a message saying the table was successfully published and may be viewed on, and we can click on the link to jump to the site. And there we go, we can now see that imported list. And we can work with this list within SharePoint much like we would any other list. We can make changes by editing in the grid view. We can add columns onto the end. Now I'm going to exit grid view. I don't want to make any changes as yet. But one thing worth noting is that when you import a list in this way, SharePoint is actually using the Lists app in Microsoft 365. If you take a look at the employee names, to the left of each of the names, we have this little icon. And this is the icon that represents the Lists app. And what I'm going to do to make this a bit easier to find is I'm going to click the star next to attendance log to favorite the list. And then we're going to jump across to the Lists app because I just want to show you how this exists in its own separate application. So in the favorites area, there it is. There is our attendance log. I can click on it and it's going to open up that same list. But this time we're working with it in the Lists application. So just bear that in mind. We're effectively viewing this list within the Lists app within SharePoint. Now, another thing that people really struggle with when they're working with lists like this is if we click away, so let's click on Home, for example, because we haven't added this list into the navigation on the left-hand side, people sometimes struggle to find where their list is stored. Now, it is worth noting that there are a couple of things you can do here. The list exists, and if you want to find it, you can click on Settings and you can go to Site Contents and you'll find the list lurking in here. So if we go down, there it is, attendance log. We can click and it's going to open up in SharePoint. So that's one way you can find it, but it's not the most convenient way sometimes. What would be much more convenient is to add it to the navigation pane, much like all of our other lists. So how can we do that? Well, once again, if we go up to the cog, we can go to List Settings and click on the List Name Description and Navigation link. And what you'll find in here is the opportunity to change the name of the list and the description, but we can also define if we want to display it on the quick launch. That is the left-hand navigation pane. So I'm going to say yes. Let's click on Save. And we should find that on the left-hand side, there it is, attendance log. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to quickly rename this so that it matches everything else. So we want to say list dash attendance log and click on Save. So now that we've done that, it's just a lot easier to be able to access this list. And the cool thing about this attendance log is that because we have a connection set up, any changes that are made in SharePoint will reflect in Excel. So I'm going to go to this first record just here and we're going to change attended from yes to no. Let's click away. And we're going to exit grid view. I can see that that change has saved. Let's jump back to Excel. So all we need to do to update this table of data and change the first record from yes to no is simply go up to the table design ribbon, go to refresh and choose refresh all. So adding lists into quick launch just makes them a lot easier for everybody to access. I just want to finish up this section on lists by introducing you to the recycle bin. Now, most of us who use Windows PCs or even people who use Mac will have access to a recycle bin. Now, for me, my recycle bin lives on my desktop and you can see it all the way in the top left-hand corner. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because the recycle bin that we use for our Windows files is different to the recycle bin that we use within SharePoint. So what I'm trying to say here is that when we delete something in SharePoint, whether it be a list, a library, or a document, you won't be able to find it in the recycle bin on your Windows PC. Each SharePoint team site has its own recycle bin. And if you take a look in the quick launch menu, you'll see there is mine right at the bottom. So if we click on this, what we're going to see are all of the items that we've deleted. And you can see I've deleted a few different things in here. I've deleted a couple of pages and I've deleted quite a few different lists. We can see the date that those files were deleted, who they were deleted by, who they were created by, and also the original location that they were deleted from. So when you do delete something in SharePoint, it isn't immediately removed from the system. You have a certain period of time in which you can come into the recycle bin and restore the deleted item if you need to. Now, the retention period currently is 93 days. So when 93 days passes, the files in the recycle bin will be permanently deleted. And it's from that point that you can't get them back. But we have a period of a good 3 months where they will stay in the recycle bin and we can restore them back to their original location. So let's say, for example, I want to restore the attendance log just here. I could select it and then notice in the top I have two options, delete or restore. Now, if I was to choose delete, that is effectively forcing SharePoint to delete the file permanently. So if I don't want to wait 93 days, and I definitely know that I want to delete one or more files from the recycle bin, I can force that through by clicking the delete button. Alternatively, we can restore the file back to its original location. So if I click on Restore, it's telling me that I already have another file with the same name. And that is true. After I deleted this test one, I then went in and created another list called Attendance Log. So let's actually try and restore a different file. I'm going to go for this page just here, Home. Let's click on Restore. That's worked. It's disappeared from the recycle bin. And that is a SharePoint page. So if I go to Pages, I can see that there it is. There is Home. If I select it one more time and delete it, this time I can click the three dots and go to Delete. That's going to put that file back into the recycle bin. There it is at the top. The final point to note here is that when we are in the recycle bin, in the top left-hand corner, we have an empty recycle bin option. So as I said, that is essentially like bringing forward the 93-day retention period, and it means we are permanently deleting all of the files in the recycle bin immediately. Now, my recommendation is always to keep your files there for the full 93 days, because you never know when you're going to need to go back and retrieve a file. So you might as well keep them on the system for as long as possible. So those are the options that you have when it comes to working with the recycle bin, deleting and restoring libraries, lists, pages, and documents. It's time now to do exercise 3. And in this exercise, we're going to get a chance to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course on SharePoint lists. So the first thing I'd like you to do is I'd like you to download the file customers.xlsx from the exercise files folder. And I'd like you to import that data from Excel into SharePoint. And I'd like you to name the list within SharePoint Customers. Once you've done that, I'd like you to sort the list from A to Z by customer name and apply a filter to show only trips going to the Asia region. And then I'd like you to save the sorted and filtered list as a new view called Asia region. I'd then like you to add that list to the quick launch pane to make it easily accessible via that navigation menu. I'd also like you to practice switching between views in your list. So make sure that you can switch between seeing all of the list items and only the list items in the filtered and sorted view. And then finally, I'd like you to apply conditional formatting to the original view that highlights trips that are above $2,000. So a few different things to do there. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing that I asked you to do was to download the Excel file customers.xlsx from the exercise files folder. And this is what that file looks like. It has 50 or so records. So now that we have this, we want to import this into SharePoint as a SharePoint list. So let's jump back to our Contoso travel site. We're going to click on New and we're going to say New List. Now from here we get a few different options. We want to import from Excel, and this is where we can upload the file. So let's click Upload, and your file is probably going to be in your Downloads folder if you've just downloaded it from the Exercise Files folder. So navigate to where you have it stored, select it, and click on Open. So now it's gone away, it's loaded up those tables, and if I take a look across at these data types, everything looks pretty good. Let's click on Next. I asked you to name it Customers, and I also asked you to make sure that this list is displayed in Site Navigation. So we want to make sure that we have a tick in this box just here. Let's click on Create. So the next thing I asked you to do was to sort the list of customer names, A to Z, and we only want to see the records for the Asia region. And I asked you to create a new view to display this. So if we go up to all items, let's say create new view. We're going to call it Asia region and click on create. So now we're working in the Asia region view. We can apply our sort and our filter. So let's go to customer name. We're going to say A to Z. Let's go to region, filter by. We're going to choose Asia and click on apply. And just to make sure, we want to save this view as Asia region. Click on Save. And then I asked you to make sure that you can switch between your two views. So now we're looking at the Asia region, but I can click the drop down, go to all items, and I can see the original view. Also notice that our customers list has been added to the quick launch navigation menu on the left hand side. The final thing I asked you to do was to conditionally format all of the records where the trip price is greater than $2,000. And I asked you to apply this conditional formatting to the original view. So that is the all items view that we're currently in. So we're going to click the drop down, we're going to go to Format Current View, and we're going to choose Conditional Formatting. Now, I don't mind what colors you use here. I'm going to say no styles for all of the records, but we are going to add a rule. And it's going to say if the column trip price is greater than $2,000, and then you can choose whatever color you like. So let's go for a green, click on save, and our conditional formatting rule is applied. That's all I need you to do in this exercise. I hope you got an okay with that, and I will see you in the next section.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the course exercise files and follow along with this video, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Sez IT.